Good morning. Good morning. It is 8:30. 8:15 is not even a thought. No good excuse, but you're not interested in excuses, right? So let's go straight in. We're doing Tekiah shofar. And we're in the midst of what I'm calling the Kabbalah part of this series. We're talking about the Kabbalah of Tekiah shofar. The Kabbalah of Tekiah shofar is called Binyan HaMalchus. And I explained to you yesterday, I used all the fancy words, Soid Shoidish and Soid Tosfos. And of course, the Soid Shoidish is changed into a Soid Tosfos through Tekiah shofar. When we blow shofar, we add the Soid Tosfos to the otherwise Soid Shoidish. That's how this works. And of course, it's all the comments of the shofar, the Mebe shofar. Why? Min ha-meitzar. The cry of the shofar is from a very deep place. And the basic attitude is that in order to cry from a deep place, you have to be very far away. You have to be in a very great darkness. That's what the words min ha-meitzar means. It's narrow. It's hard. And that sets up, that makes it possible that there should be the anoni b'merchav, the idea that there is a expansion that goes till atzmos. And then there's Binyan HaMalchus. And Binyan HaMalchus allows that the involvement of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in his world shouldn't be minimal, Malchus Sheba Malchus, or Kesser Sheba Malchus, but it should be with a great harchova, which is the difference between Meluch and Memshala. I'm talking a lot. I'm saying a lot of words. It doesn't necessarily mean that Hashem is going to give you more, materially or even spiritually. But it does mean necessarily that he's going to be giving you more of himself. In other words, what the gift is may be the same, but what the gifter is, what of the Eibishter Kvayochel is invested in the creation could be quite different. Now, in the course of this conversation, we came across Adam Rishon and the idea of Du Partzufim Nivru'u, which is discussed in the Maimer of Memdalad in some detail. And I decided to go there, meaning to say, according to the syllabus, today should be the last class on this shofar series, and the conversation should be about, if you have the access to the sheets, about the difference between Sfiras HaMalchus and all the other Sfiras. Why Sfiras HaMalchus, Binyan HaMalchus is such a big chiddush? But I'm either delaying it or I'm canceling it. It depends. I have to see what's going to be Chol HaMoed and what's going to be after Yom Tov. I don't know. Once I go back to school, I don't have time to do these self-serving extra classes, as it were. Self-serving means I love to teach and I need to finish. So we're going to have a conversation about Adam Rishon. And this is the ideal marshal for understanding the concept of Binyan HaMalchus. What I'm going to share is discussed in many places in Chassidus, of course, based on Kabbalah. One of those preeminent sources, one of the places where this is with great arich is in Hemshech Eter, Tafresh Ayin from the Rebbe Rashab. That this year is 111 years since the Rebbe Nishma Seiden said the Maimorim. It says in the Chumash that when Hashem created the world, He created life. He created plants, He created reptiles, He created amphibians, He created fish, He created small mammals that are called shrotzim, He created large animals, behemoths and chayes, and then He created man, Adam and Chava. So the pasuk says that when the Eibishter created all of the creations, Adam Rishon did not have a partner. So it says in the Chumash that the Eibishter put him to sleep, and he did an operation. He took one of his slois, which the whole world translates as a rib, even though there is no such use of the word as slois meaning a rib. And the rest is history. That Hashem created Chava from Adam. Now, in the Gemara, there are two opinions about what this means, that Hashem created Chava from Adam. One opinion is that Adam had a zonav, had a tail, which was the vertebrae. That tail was disconnected from Adam Rishon, and from that he built Chava. And the other opinion is that Yu Partzufim Nivru. Yu Partzufim Nivru means that Adam and Chava were actually created as two people, two total people, created at the same time, attached as a spine, ocha ba'ocha, back to back, like this. In Rashi, that's what it says. That's the opinion that Rashi brings. That Adam and Chava were created Yu Partzufim Nivru, two bodies back to back. So the notion that Chava was created from Adam is quite simplistic. If you go on the opinion that it was a zonov, then it's true, Chava was created from Adam, but that's not the opinion that's accepted in Pshuta Shel Mikra. And at the very least, there is the other opinion, and that's the opinion which is brought by the Rishonim a lot. In other words, there's a very basic, or there's a misunderstanding of the simple story. Hashem did not take a rib from Adam and create Chava. There's no such opinion in Torah. There's just simply no such opinion in Torah. Either it was a tail, in other words, a series of vertebrae, or Adam and Chava were two people created back to back. To say it in different words, Lahavdol, Elef Avdal, in most species, Hashem created males and females. Zochar and Nekeva, they're separate. And they're coming together as very distinct purposes, or limited purposes, for procreation. When the Eibishter created Adam, that means man, which of course is in the image of God, the very definition of the word Adam is Zochar Nekeva B'ram. A human being is a male and a female. In other words, a human being is not males and females that join together for some purpose, as it is in the case of animals. Adam means a Zochar and a Nekeva together. And there's an explicit pasuk in Parshas Bereishis, in the beginning of Kapitel Hey, I believe, or Vav, where it says Zochar u'Nekeva B'ra'am va'yikra es shemam Adam. Male and female he created them, and he called them collectively Adam. What is the female for Ish, Isha? What is the female for Gever, Giveret, or Gaveret? What is the female for Enish, Enusha? What is the female for Adam? Not Adama, the female for Adam is Adam. Because the meaning of the word Adam is a man and a woman together. In other words, the human group, the human type, was created from HaKadosh Baruch Hu in such a way that their basic definition is Zachar and Nekeva. Right, Al Kain, Yazev Isha Sabev Esimei, a person is born. V'davak B'ishti, he joins with his Isha, with his wife. V'hayu L'Basarechet, they become one. And of course, Rashi says Basarechet means in the children. But in humankind, they're different than animals, that the relationship between a man and a woman is not only for a particular purpose. That's the definition of a person. The definition of a person is Zochar and Nekeva, a man and a woman. And it started out to be physically so, that when Adam and Chava were created, they were physically attached. And it even says in the Rishonim, I think it says in the Ramban, that as Adam and Chava were attached back to back, they could have procreated, they could have had children. But you have to assume that if they had stayed that way, the children also would have been born. Every male would have been born together with a female. Or every human being would be a Zochar and a Nekeva together. And the meaning of the Eibishter doing an operation and separating Adam from Chava was not creating Chava out of Adam. It was simply separating the male half of Adam from the female half of Adam. There should be two instead of being one. It's the Pshuta Shel Mikra. I'm not saying anything exotic. That's the simple meaning of the story of Adam and Chava being created. Zochar Nekeva B'ram, V'yishmam Adam. And then the Eibishter separates them to make them into two people who can have a relationship. So you have to think of it in these words, in these terms. Before the Eibishter did this so-called operation, Adam and Chava were more connected than they could ever possibly be. They were more connected than they can ever possibly be. Ever possibly be. Why? They're one physical body, or their bodies were joined. But there was no relationship between Adam and Chava. It wasn't like Adam was one person and Chava was a different person, and there was a connection between Adam and Chava. Adam slept Chava around, or Adam slept Adam around, however you want to say it. But there was no two entities that interfaced. So the Zohar and the Nekeva Bram was such that there really was only one will. There was still a Mashpia and a Makabel, right? There was still Adam, there was still Chava, as Chava was one with Adam, but there was no relationship. There's no relationship because Chava and Adam were attached. When the Eibishter separates Adam from Chava, so now let's use fancy words, these Kabbalah words. The fancy Kabbalah words are that prior to the Nesira, the word that's used in Kabbalah is Nesira, that means the separation. Prior to the Nesira, Adam and Chava were attached back to back, Acher b'Acher, like this. And after they were separated, then they became possible to have the relationship Panim b'Panim, like this, face to face. Panim b'Panim. In other words, originally, their relationship on the one hand was perfect. There couldn't be any conflict because there was no two people. But in as much as the two halves of this Adam interfaced, it was very, very limited because there was no relationship. There were no two minds. There were no two hearts. There were no two wills. There were no two interests that needed to be negotiated and to resolved and to be joined together. There was one. So there's a concept of a Mashpia Makabel. There's still the Zohar half, there's still the Nekeva half of the relation between Adam and Chava, but their involvement in what aspect was Adam and Mashpia and Chava Makabel is called Nihi, Nekuda, Acher b'Acher. When Adam and Chava become separated, now you have Ezer and Kenegde. If the marriage works, so then you have a meeting of a mind and a mind, of a heart and a heart, of senses and senses, and obviously you also have the basic relationship, the Peruavu Miltzazik of Shua. But because you have two minds, you have two hearts, and you have two sets of senses, they can also be connected, there can also be conflict. So you're trading in a secure less for a much more challenging more. That's how you have to understand it. You're trading in a relationship where one is completely dominant, so you have no trouble from your counterpart, but you have no connection to the counterpart, so that there should be a pneumius dika bond. There should be a more meaningful relationship. But if there's going to be a more meaningful relationship, there could also be dissent, there could also be objection, there could also be that if we misbehave, if men misbehave, the wife says, "Excuse me, I'm not your puppet, I'm not your tail." And that's the story of creation of Adam and Chava as it's understood in Kabbalah. Like I said, it's based originally on the Gemara, and that's explained in the Rishonim and so on. So that's the meaning of these words that we read here. Adam and Chava, Yu Partzufim Nivru. They were attached. They were one Partzuf, made of, Yu means two. Two forms were created as one. Then there was a Nesira. Nesira means you separated the two. And the translation of the word Tzela, by the way, Tzela doesn't mean a rib, Tzela means a side or a half. We took half of what Adam and Rishon was, and now there were two. So the upside is that now they can face each other, panim b'panim. They can have a much more meaningful relationship. But now you have two days, you have two minds, you have two hearts, so there can be conflict. And what does it depend on? Alayim teitiv se'eis, ivim loy seitiv, and so on. In other words, if you act like you're supposed to act, you have respect. And if you don't act like you're supposed to have, you don't have any respect. So this description of what it means that Adam and Chava were created, how they were created is a mashal, or is a form of the Yinabiyana Malchus. To say it in other words, every idea in Kabbalah happens in every world. And the reason physically, Adam and Chava were created different than animals. That first they were connected, and then they were separated, and then they were rejoined, is because this is how it is in the whole Seder Ishtalshalos. As I explained to you yesterday, that the Seid Shedish of Malchus is Nekuda Achas. The Seid Shedish of Zah is Vav Ktsavis. The reason Malchus of Atzilus is only a point, the reason Zah of Atzilus is only Vav Ktsavis, it's missing Moichin, is because in Atzilus there's also a Zachar and a Nekeva, a Mashpia and a Makabel. And in the model of the Seid Shedish, Malchus is completely bottled. Zah is less bottled, but Malchus is completely bottled. Now, bittul is a good thing, right? Bittul is a good thing. But bittul also means that there's no counterpart, there's no other entity. So binyan hamalchus, if you think about it, is the same thing as binyan of Chava. Or binyan of Chava is the same thing as binyan hamalchus, to be more correct. Malchus is separate from Zoh. Zun is separate from Avoh. In other words, there's a model of a mashpia and a makabel. There's a model of a zocher and a nekeva. But in order for the model of the mashpia and makabel to work, the mashpia has to be an entity, and the makabel has to be an entity. So when the Eibishter creates a beside shadish, the nekeva, the makabel, is an entity by being bottle. What's the upside? It's easy. What's the downside? That the hashpah is very limited. It's called ocha b'yocha. How much can you give to another person who's so subservient to you? They don't have their own mind. They don't have their own heart. They have no relationship with you. Malchus was created beside Shadish because Malchus was created to be a makabel in such a way where she has no identity other than serving the Zohar. But so the upside is, okay, it's easy. The downside is there's no relationship. There's nothing more nothing meaningful going on in the Yachas and the Zohar and the Nekeva. So it just separates them. And when it brings them back together, Malchus is called Binyan HaMalchus. Binyan HaMalchus means that there's not bittul. There's Metzias, there's Tzir. Malchus has her own form. Malchus has her own Moichin, Malchus has her own Mides, and therefore the relationship between Zohar and Nekeva is more complicated. But on the other hand, the relationship between Zohar and Nekeva is meaningful. It's a pneumistic relationship. And because that's how it is in the Eilam Hal Yoinim, that's how it is also in Adam and Chava. So that's how we understand the concept of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, the Eibishter, so to speak, resigns. The relationship that the Eibishter had with the world the year before, which is predicated on the relationship between the Sfiris and Atzilus, the Zohar of Atzilus and the Nekeva of Atzilus, Zon Malchus, ends. What happens when it ends? What happens when it ends? So Malchus goes back to what she is, Beseid Shadish Nekuda Achas. Nekuda Achas sounds good, bittul. I have no identity of my own. Whatever the Zohar wants, I want, and that's all there is to it. But that's not what Eibishter wants. Because if that's the relationship between Malchus and Zoh, between the Nekeva and the Zohar, so then there's no hashpah pnimius. There's no meaningful relation between the Zohar and the Nekeva. So the offspring that come from such a relationship also don't have any pnimius. So there's binyan HaMalchus. So binyan HaMalchus really means separating Malchus from Zoh, making Malchus into Metzias of her own, so that the relationship between the Zohar and the Nekeva could be complete. And this is how it manifests in Adam and Chava as well. That the Eibishter separates Adam from Chava, now you have two people. Two totally separate people. The upside is they can have a real full relationship. And like I said earlier, this does not exist lahavdil of those by animals. The Eibishter made human beings, Zohar and Nekeva. A Pi Torah, people are supposed to be married. Period. Because the definition of a person is a man and a woman. In other words, in the most ideal form, a man and a woman together are not two people. A man and a woman together, that's a person. It's hard. There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of room for mistakes. There's a lot of room for disappointment. There's a lot of room for frustrations. A lot of room for all kinds of negative things. But on the other hand, this completes a person. To say it in psychological terms, I guess this class is becoming more psychology than anything else. To say it in psychological terms, a person can get through his life by avoiding to deal with who he or she really is. Not to identify my bad midas, not to identify my fears, not to identify my selfishness, not to identify the aspects of their own life. How do I do it? I don't get close to people. If I keep a distance between myself and other people, I can afford to maintain an appearance that is good, but this appearance is hiding all of the limitations and the weaknesses and the fears and the phobias that I have. Torah says you have to get maximally close to a person. The maximum closeness that can be between a person and a person is in a marriage, a Zohar and a Nekeva. In that environment, there's no way to hide any of who we are, any of our midas rois, any of our fears, right? And we have to be mavad them. We have to deal with them. And if we don't deal with them, we have problems in our marriage. But it othermises us, makes us into a mensch. That's what the Eibishter made us to be. The Eibishter made us to be Zachar and Nekeva B'ram. Shmam Adam. In other words, the idea that you hear in all the drashas, that it says in the Zohar, that a man and a woman by themselves are a palga guf, they're half, and they're only complete when they come together. It's not just a nice dvar teira, it's the way the Eibishter made people. A person is complete in his relationship with his spouse or her spouse, a man with a woman and a woman with a man. And the promise is, the prospect is that the relationship is not only in order to have children. The relationship is on every single level of what the human being is. But that's difficult, because then you have to be mavader, you have to correct, you have to heal, you have to repair, you have to refine every aspect of who we are in order for this relationship to work. You can't leave alone your selfishness, you can't leave alone your midas rois, you can't leave alone your fears, you can't leave alone your obsessions, you can't leave alone your compulsions, because the marriage can't work. So either you run away or you become more mensch. And that's what a human being is. That's how you're a mensch. And this is a mashal for binyan malchus. Why did the Eibishter make malchus b'seid shedish nekuda achas? Because it's bittul. Best thing, bittul. It's easy. But there's no relationship. And there's no relationship, there's no work. There's no work, there's no refinement. Then there's a nesira. There's a separation from Adam and Chava. There's a separation from Nukva from Zah. And then there's a turning around, ponim b'ponim, binyan malchus. Now there's two minds, two hearts, two sets of senses, and so forth and so on. And in that framework, both halves of this whole person become more person. Okay, so yesterday this came up in the shiur, and I considered doing a class on it, and I just did. I suppose you could say that I talked very fast and said a lot, and it could have been better organized, and I could have said it more slowly. But I'm going to stop now. Today's out of Yom Tov. Like I said, I didn't finish what I wanted to say about shofar and binyan malchus. There's one more idea that I need to share, which I either will or won't share. But this is how we go into Sukkot. This is our last class before Sukkot. It was a short class, and I touched on this idea of Dupar Tzuf and Nivir. I want to wish everybody a Freilich and Yom Tov. I want to mention that the Rebbe would often mention that it says in Kisvei Arizal that Erev Sukkot is the day to give a lot of tzedakah. The Rebbe says he doesn't know why, if I'm not mistaken. But in Kabbalah, it's written that Erev Sukkot is the day to give a lot of tzedakah, so we should give a lot of tzedakah, and the Eibishter should give a lot of tzedakah. And it shouldn't only be tzedakah, it should also be gemilas chasodim, not just to mechuyev l'hachayosei, that Eibishter has to keep us alive. V'yat mechuyev l'ashesh doesn't have to make us rich, but that Eibishter should make us rich in all areas of wealth, including being a mensch and having shalom bayis and all those other things.